dying, but not through death yet. And yet, love transcends death. But to be that wisdom is different than knowing that wisdom. And I am dying into that wisdom. Is this too weird for you, or are you still here with me? Because I work a lot with people that are grieving, and my way of supporting grieving is to say, grieve. My God, grieve. Don't try to stop grieving. Don't be strong. Grieve some more. Go grieve some more. Just allow the human pain. Don't hide it. Just let it keep going through it. And then at some point, you will quiet down naturally. It might take a couple of years, who knows. At some point you will quiet down. You will be quiet enough to realize that the love, when you and another person enter into the space of love together for even a moment, that relationship has transcended relationship. You have entered into a unitive moment together, and that transcends death. And at that moment, when you quiet down enough and you're sitting with your beloved, you suddenly realize that where did they go? As Ramana Maharshi said, where could I go? I'm still here. Just the form that left. You were busy missing the form. You weren't missing the essence, because the essence is here. And when you recognize that, you feel as a human being enriched by everybody you have loved, instead of deprived by the loss of their form. You realize that they're living through you, and that everybody you've ever loved is part of the fabric of your being now, in the way in which you go forward. And that's where grief gets transformed into a living love space, a spiritual transcendence of the pain. There was a nurse in a seminar that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and I were doing together. She was about in her, I think, late 20s, and she had 3 children, and she had advanced cancer. And she had been through many, many operations. And it was a very poignant story with 3 young children. And she said to the audience, what would you feel if you came to visit me in the hospital? And different people raised their hands, and Elizabeth wrote on the board, and some of them said anger, and some of them said anger at God, some of them said pain, some of them said sadness at your plight, some of them said confusion, a whole list of things. And she then said, you see the predicament? She said, all of you were so busy being with 28-year-old nurse with 3 children with cancer. Nobody was with me. You see the issue, I mean, when working with an AIDS patient or cancer patient, really, the symbolic power of dying is so powerful that it's extremely hard to get through it, to be with the person behind it. Like, I have a friend, Kelly, who was a quadriplegic. Kelly was a quadriplegic. He was hit on the side of the head when he was about 9 years old, and it was misdiagnosed. So you can hold his hand over an alphabet board, and he can spell out words, and that's the way he communicates. And he's like this, and he's fully awake and fully brilliant, and he's 33 years old. Kelly is a delight, absolutely a delight. I had Kelly introduce me once when I was speaking before a group of doctors and holistic health healers, and about 500 people in the audience, and Kelly was wheeled onto the stage, and of course they were all aghast, you know, like Kelly spells out R.D., Ramdas, R.D. says we are not our bodies, amen. But when I met Kelly, the immensity of his predicament so caught my consciousness that it took me almost 6 months of visiting with him before I could get behind the symbolic power of his identity, his social identity, and his physical identity, to meet him, to say, are you in there? And now Kelly and I have been together for 8 years, and, you know, I mean, he's just another being, just like me. He's just got his karmic trip, and I got mine. I've just been through a very profound experience with Kelly. About 2 months ago, Kelly said to me, I've decided I've had enough, and I'd like to commit suicide. I said, well, you have every right to do that. He said, what do you think about it? I said, well, a human birth is an opportunity to do incredible spiritual work. And you've been doing incredible work, and there's a lot more you could do, because you're still a hung-up, greedy little bastard. But you could do some great work. Kelly and I have a good relationship, as you can see. I said, but you know, I don't know how much, the game is you take what you can take. And when you have had enough taking, you stop. There's no blame, you know. Nobody's going to come and say, you committed suicide, your turn. Not from where I'm sitting. I said, and I'll miss you terribly. I wish you wouldn't because I really love having you around. But you have a right to do it. The problem is how you're going to do it. So he can't take anything. He can't move his hand. He can't take pills. He can't cut his throat. What's he going to do? So we talked about it, and I said, well, I think the only way you can do it is not eat. Because he can just, most of the stuff goes in, he chokes as he's being fed, but he can swallow. So that day he decided to stop eating. And he called his mother and his father and his step-parents and all gathered, and the doctor and everybody. And I had gone and left for somewhere else, and he kept saying, Ram Dass has given me the courage. I thought, oh, God, And I've decided to stop living. And so he fasted for 49 days. And I spoke to the doctor, and the doctor said, well, now, this young man could do a great deal with his life. And, you know, he was being doctory because he had to protect his insurance. And I said, well, doctor, tell me, if you were in Kelly's predicament for 20 years, he said, I don't know. I said, well, that's the predicament. I don't either. And when we don't know, we've got to give Kelly the support to do what he wants to do, because how are we to tell him what to do? So then, around the 48th day, I came to see Kelly. He had lost 30 pounds. He was too weak almost to push the button. I mean, it took a long time to get the thing out. And he said, what do you think happens at the moment of death? So I told him what I thought would happen. He said, it's still all right with you if I die? I said, it's up to you. I'll miss you, and I think you could do more work, but it's okay with me. And that evening he ate. But in those 48 days, he took me through so much. He took his parents through so much. He took everybody. Now, most of the people around him are really pissed off at him. They're really angry at him. How could you do this to us? And he said to me, are you angry with me? I said, angry? What a gift you gave me. You took me so close to the issue. You kept me awake with it all the way through. When you get to the place where your awareness is really clear, let me just tell you a story. I'll just give you a couple of stories to give you feelings. In an olden time, an army is going through villages and it's killing many people, and it's a Buddhist country, and it's disemboweling the monks, and it's getting rid of Buddhism, which happened a lot in times of Genghis Khan and stuff like that. And there was one particularly harsh captain, and he had a bad reputation of being very cruel. And he came into this town and he said to his adjutant, what's happening in the town? And the adjutant said, all the people are bowing down to you, they're all afraid of you, and in the monastery all the monks have fled to the mountains except for one monk. And the captain was furious that there was a monk who was still there. And he got up and he walked to the monastery and he pushed open the gates. And there in the middle of the courtyard was the monk, just standing there. And the captain walked up to him and he said, don't you know who I am? I could take my sword and run it through your belly without blinking an eye. And don't you know who I am, said the monk. I could have your sword run through my belly without blinking an eye. Apocryphally, the captain bowed and left. And when you start to get into the spiritual literature, you start to see a lightness about death. A Zen monk is dying, and Zen monks' masters are supposed to leave a verse. And he hadn't written his verse, and his students were very concerned he died before he wrote his verse. So they kept saying, what about your verse? What about your verse? So he picked up his brush and he calligraphied, birth is thus, death is thus, verse or no verse, what's the fuss? And he died. I want to read you just two things. And I went way out on a limb here, and I had to do this, and I'll explain why. This is one of the hardest stories you'll have to hear. An 11-year-old girl and her girlfriend went to the Jewish Community Center in the Northwest to play tennis, and they were both raped and murdered. And I was called that night by somebody who said, the parents are people who have read your books and listened to your tapes, and perhaps there's something you could say to them at this moment. And I realized I couldn't do it tomorrow. It had to be done right now. And so I sat down. And the enormity of that pain was so great, it catapulted me out of the ego part of me that felt insecure in writing. And so I wrote this letter, which I'd like to share with you.